How old this is. It's falling apart. It's a leader post. Here's my grandma. And down here, at the bottom of this picture it says, I don't know if you can read that, "Who is this child?" This is basically a story about the best woman in the world and the biggest inspiration to me and all my siblings and all my cousins. She's amazing.
As a baby, a woman from Regina was abandoned as a child. She spent years trying to find her biological family.
Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, I'm Victoria. I upload vlogs and lifestyle videos on this channel every Wednesday and Sunday. Today's video is pretty interesting. It's about my grandmother. If you've read the title of this video, you probably already have a little hint as to what it's about, or if you know me in real life, then you definitely have heard this story. Yeah, so this story is all about how my grandma was abandoned at birth. I'm gonna try and keep it short. It'll probably be all over the place. If you see me looking down, I have a bunch of notes so that I don't forget anything. And yeah, let's get into it. When my grandma was 2 days old, she was found under a caragana bush. She was found by two 11-year-old children, one named Jean, one named Roy. It was a boy and girl. They were playing outside of their house before church in the morning, and they heard what they had thought was a kitten crying, so they went to go and look, and it wasn't a kitten, it was my grandma, when she was 2 days old. Sometimes when I'm telling the story, it'll sound like, or I'll tell people my grandma was found under a caragana bush, so they're picturing like this little old elderly lady like laying under a bush. It wasn't like that. She was 2 days old, so very little. So they ran and they told their parents. So basically where she was found was right across the street from the Home for Unwed Mothers in Regina, Saskatchewan. This is the Home for Unwed Mothers. We're guessing she was left there because they knew she would be found by one of the nurses and would be in good care in that home, and they would find a family to adopt her. So when Roy and Jean ran and told their parents, they brought the baby to the Home for Unwed Mothers, to the nurses there. After she was brought there, eventually there was a court hearing, and she was made ward of the Children's Aid Society. She was named by the judge. So the judge named her Jean after the little girl who found her as her first name. He named her middle name Margaret just because he liked that name, and then her last name was Lane because she was found in a little laneway. So yeah, that's how she got her name. That's the laneway that she was named after. After a while, she was loaded into a little car, a little buggy, and they took her around door to door trying to find a family that was looking to adopt a child and would take her in. And that was kind of hard to do back in 1931 because it was during the Great Depression, so a lot of people didn't have money for their own children, let alone adopting another one. Which was also what we thought might be one of the reasons why she was abandoned in the first place, because it was during the Great Depression. So eventually they did find a couple that wanted to adopt her. They were named Gertrude, or Gertie, and Daniel, or Dan. They were a childless couple. There's the judge's order for my grandma's adoption and her legal name change, and they ended up raising her. My grandma did mention growing up that she was alone and she didn't have any siblings, but that she never wanted for anything. She was treated very well by this couple, raised well, and she had everything. So although my grandma did have a wonderful life growing up with this couple, she was still always curious about her origins and where she came from, and eager to find out a lot more about her birth family. As soon as she turned 21, she wrote the Child Welfare Branch of the Department of Social Welfare and Rehabilitation to get answers. rehabilitation. I said that weird. Anyways, she was crushed by the response that she got. Not much information, definitely not what she was hoping for. I'll read you guys the response she got back in 1952 at 21 years old. Here we go. Jean, you will realize by this time that we do not know if your parents were married, nor what religion and nationality they were, nor whether you have any brothers or sisters. There is no one else who could give you this information. We are unable to say why your parents could not keep you, Jean. We do know that it was during the Depression when many parents found it difficult to keep their children. So that was that. And she was at a dead end for quite a while after that letter. She didn't know what to do next or who to contact. So decades later, after my grandma had started her own family, she'd married my grandpa, Clifford, or Cliff as we call him. She married him, she settled down, they moved to Ontario, where I live now. They had one son, their oldest Ivan, and then they had two more, a set of twins, my uncle Dennis and my uncle Dave. And then they had my uncle Wayne, who was the youngest boy, so there were 4 boys. And then they had my mom, Sandy, or Sandra, and she was the baby of the family. So yeah, after all that, not really knowing where she came from, she started her own family and lived an amazing few years here. But she was not done searching yet. So after decades of starting her own family and living her life, she decided to further her search. So in 1978, she appeared in newspapers, on radio stations, and she did a big search hoping that her parents or siblings or someone who knew of her story may recognize her or know her and contact her. So I have another clip here. This is what she said. I've had a very happy and busy life with wonderful adoptive parents, and I bear no ill feelings to anyone. But I would dearly love to know my medical and biological background, as would my 5 children, and of course, if some members of my family should contact me, it would indeed be a once thought impossible dream come true. Police Department. It says, Dear Miss Fish, regarding Jean Fish's inquiry, with reference to your correspondence of June 23rd, 1978, I regret to advise you that our files for that time period are no longer available. May your inquiries through other sources be more successful. Yours truly, and then the signature. She had written the Regina Public Library. It says, Dear Miss Fish, I regret to inform you that I have been unable to find any material relating to your background which you requested in your letter of June 23rd. We have all the issues of the Regina Leader Post on microfilm dating back to 1983 and the indexes for most of these years. I checked the indexes under various subject headings and the relevant time period, but found no clues. I suspect that baby abandonment would have occurred too frequently during the Depression years to warrant attention in the newspaper. Mind you, there may have been an obscure reference, but one would have to go through the paper very carefully to find it. This would likely be looking for a needle in a haystack, and the needle probably does not even exist. So she had a lot of letters that basically all turned up with nothing to help her search. More letters from newspapers, none of them saying much. More letters. There's literally like hundreds and hundreds of letters that she sent out to different places, and they all turned up with nothing at all. Just imagine how hard that would have been. How old this is. It's falling apart. It's a Leader Post. Here's my grandma. And down here, at the bottom of this picture, it says, I don't know if you can read that, who is this child? Who is she? Miss Jean Fish is looking for some clues to her identity. Miss Fish, who is shown above at the age of 2, was abandoned in Regina at 1931. She was thought to be 2 days old at the time, and her mother was never located. Although Miss Fish is now a grandmother, she still has a desire to learn about her background with all this. I feel like I'm borrowing from a museum. Parent finder's letter. She was in contact with them to try and find them. There's a photocopy of one of the newspaper articles. There's another photocopy of a newspaper, and she has it circled. It's hard to read now, but that's one of the original articles. It's another newspaper article. There's one written about Jean, about her recalling finding my grandma. That one makes it seem like we abandoned our grandmother while she was an old elderly woman. Can you imagine being in her shoes? And I don't know what happened to my voice there. Imagine being in her shoes and sending all these letters after letters and searches and meeting with all these newspapers after newspapers, and all of them ended up being dead ends other than finding the children who found her. That's crazy to me. How disheartening would that be? And she would never, never, never want anyone to feel sorry for her. She thinks she had a great life growing up. She has, you know, no regrets. It's crazy. She wouldn't complain about anything. She never, never once was angry at her birth parents for giving her up. She said they gave her life. How could she ever be mad about that? And that's crazy, because a lot of people would not have that mindset. You're gonna light my house on fire. What are they doing? Within days, she had received a response from Jean, the little girl who had found her. This was the first she had heard from the children who had found her, and the first way they had known of how to contact this little baby they found of when they were younger, but I'm sure they thought of her a lot growing up. It says, "My dear Jean, well, hasn't this been a red letter week? After I received the letter from my friend in Regina with the clipping of your write-up, I had all day to think, weep, and cry. I was so grateful to think I could so easily contact you. It was easy for you to be at a loss for words. I could give you no hint at all before I called. However, the initial emotion is over and I can retell my story to you. Roy, aged 11, and Jean, aged 11, found you. We were on our veranda playing cards that Sunday morning. My parents had gone to church, and my sister Grace and I were waiting to go to Sunday school. She was upstairs getting ready. I heard the kitten crying again and told Roy I had heard that during the night, but my mom had explained that it was one of the babies across the road. But I believed Roy when he said, 'Someone's trying to smother a cat.' So we raced out and he snatched up the blanket and your head became visible. We each tore off to our respective homes to exclaim, 'We found a baby!' When my parents came home from church, they and the Burdens took you across the street to the nurses at the Salvation Army home. My mother always said that you were the most beautiful baby she had ever seen. Roy and I went over to see you, and the nurses said that they would name you after us, Jean Roy, and they did. But I certainly never expected your family to retain the name. The police came around the house and asked questions. The write-up was in the paper, and I kept it in these many years. Mom phoned to see how you were getting on after a couple of weeks, but they told her you had been adopted. What tops everything is that all of our family has been here to experience its emotional roots, finding part of my life, and theirs because they've known the story. The baby that Mom found all of their lives. I'm sure your family is happy for you, as mine is for me. I can remember my mom telling other women that she would have loved to have taken you into our home, but she had 2 girls and the depression was on. If it hadn't been for the depression, perhaps you and Grace and I would have been sisters. With love, Jean." There's my grandma and Jean, the little girl she was named after, who found her. There's one of the original newspaper clippings. There's my grandma, my grandpa, And there's Jean, the girl she was named after, and the little girl who originally found her. And a big article. This is a little map that I'm guessing Jean drew for her. So we've got the house where she was found, and then a little thing that points and says U, so that's where she would have been. And then this would have been Jean's house, and that would have been Roy's. There's some of the original letters from Jean, the girl who found her. And then later, a response from Roy, the little boy who had found her, followed as well. Some of the ones from Roy, little boy who found her. Then I must ask you to give a great big hello to my old childhood friend and co-discoverer, Jean. Had you been more considerate, Jean, you would have been a boy and been called Roy Jean, but I will forgive you. Perhaps about now I should give you my recollection of how your discovery took place, and you can compare it with Jean's. You know, it's so fresh in my memory. I think I could take you to the exact spot where we found you. Jean and I were playing in her front yard when we heard a meowing sound, coming from the Wrights' yard next door. It was surrounded by a caragana hedge. The Wrights, including Kenny, our good friend, were always away on vacation. When we entered the yard, we found that the sound was coming from a rolled-up bundle of blanket, and the first thought that came to my mind was someone had wrapped a cat and left it there. Anyway, I'm afraid your introduction to your young discoverers consisted of my prodding at the rolled-up bundle with the toe of my boot, until, panic stations, the cat turned out to be a baby. The rest is sort of a blur, but I know we raced out of there, and the next thing I remember you were at my house and everyone was in a turmoil trying to find a baby bottle, etc. And then there were detectives asking questions. The reason for your being left in our particular neighborhood was pretty obvious, as there was a newly built nursing home type of building directly across the street from our homes, and whoever left you knew that you'd be taken care of and receive tender care. I think you have to reflect on why a mother would feel compelled to give up a beautiful new baby. Conditions in 1931 were grindingly hard for many people. It was the depth of the Depression, and there was abject poverty everywhere. I'm just saying all this to show you how terribly hard it must have been for your natural mother at the time. It would be beautiful if your ambition is realized and you were able to get together with the lady who bore you. I do think that with all the publicity your story has recently received, that the lady might finally know what became of the baby she had to give up long ago. If so, I'm sure it must be tremendous relief to have worries of all these years relieved. Whether she comes forward or not is a decision she can make, and I'm sure you would respect that. Well, I've rambled on long enough for now, Jean. Once again, I can only repeat how wonderful it is to hear the story of my first little girl. Love, Roy. Roy took her to the exact spot where they had found her back in 1931, across from the home for unwed mothers. When they got there, they were doing construction on the sidewalk where she was found, and they were ripping up all of the boards, so she asked if she could take the ones in the spot where they had found her, and she brought them home, and it's displayed right now in her home. It is up on her wall, and it has photos and newspaper clippings from way back when she did that original search, and it has a glass covering. I believe one of my uncles did that for her. Yeah, it's really cool. I'll definitely insert a clip for you guys to see here.
Sounds good.
From finding Roy and Jean, that was amazing in itself, but it still did not bring her any closer to knowing who her birth family was. But she did stay friends with Roy and Jean up until they both passed away. She had always said that Jean was like the sister that she never had. And my family, we also grew up knowing her as well. and that was amazing. We are still friends with her family and her children to this day. So that is it for the first part of the video. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is a lot more of the story to be told. So if you are interested in keeping along with the series and finding out more about my grandma and her biological family, then subscribe down below and hit that little bell so you get notified whenever I post a video. Give it a like and comment down below what you thought of the first part. Yeah, subscribe, and in a few days I'll have the next part up. Bye guys.